Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's been several weeks since I last posted, and that's because not too long after the last installment, I actually pulled some muscles in my back and wasn't able to do anything out here. I was lucky that I could still go to work, and weirdly I could still ride motorcycle, but I couldn't do anything out here in the shop. So that's why this has taken so long and why there's so little progress to share with you, but we have some things we want to talk about. So let me turn the camera around and I'll show you what's going on. All right, so here we are back in the garage, and this is kind of where we are with the engine swap right now. The engine, of course, is in and got a lot of things hooked up. Got the plug wires run, most of that's done. Got the oil filter on, and I'm currently working on the fuel lines. And wasn't happy with the arrangement that the previous person that did this engine came up with. This doesn't really fit very well, so I wound up getting one of these. I'm going to try to put that on. I think that'll do a better job. And the other thing we're doing, of course, is we had to redo the fuel lines where they came from the tank. Now, originally, the 6-cylinder fuel line terminated kind of in here and pointing up. What I was able to do was bend that existing line, and it comes underneath the frame rail now, and will wind up going alongside the frame rail here. I have a little bit more work to do with it and a clamp to put on, but it's going to run along there, and then it'll connect, and we'll make another piece utilizing this clamp here in the factory hole, bringing it up and going through this hole here with the rubber grommet in it. That terminates right here. And this is where all the Mustangs, and I would imagine the V8 Falcons, have their fuel line coming in. This was the fuel filter that was on the engine when I got it, and the associated hoses. You can see it points right to that. And this was off of a Mustang. So that should all replicate the factory fuel line. And then I have to construct something that comes up and goes to the car, because like I said, what the previous person did here, I just wasn't too happy with. It wasn't suitable, in my opinion, for what I wanted it to do. So we're going to be making a new one for that. Additionally, I got the carburetor kind of sitting on there, but wound up having a problem with the electric choke. The one that was on it was a Holly one, and it didn't do anything to hold the choke closed. I think the spring inside was bad or defective or something, so I wound up getting this generic one off of eBay because Edelbrock wants a ridiculous amount of money for a choke thermostat, like 35 bucks. And it's identical, this no-name brand, and just have to run these wires. So you have a ground, have to put that someplace. And then the positive one, I was trying to figure out where that should go. And the consensus is that you can just use the stator connection on the alternator. Now, there's some people that kind of poo-pooed that, but most of the guys that utilized that said it was perfectly fine and it worked good for them. So that's what I'm going to try. So I have to hook those two wires up. The other thing I have yet to do, and I'm kind of waffling on this to be honest, is I have the Petronix ignition in this distributor. It's what the engine came with, and it's all wired to the coil. But this car still has the resistor wire in the harness under the dash. And there are ways you can work around it or remove it. I am the kind of person who's very reluctant to go hacking into factory wiring when it's in good condition. And so I'm sitting here contemplating all this and going, you know, why don't I just go back to points? Now, that may seem like a regressive step to a lot of people, but hear me out. Properly set, with a good set of points and condenser and everything working as it should, would function perfectly fine. The 6-cylinder I had that started beautifully. There was no problems with cold starts, hot starts, anything with that. It had good spark. everything worked as it should. Electronic ignition is theoretically better and more reliable in a sense you don't have to check it and readjust it every so often. But the thing I don't like is any kind of aftermarket electronic ignition. If it dies, you're stuck unless you carry spare parts to replace it with. So I had a Petronix in the past on an FE engine in my truck, and it worked perfectly fine. I didn't have any trouble with it. But I know from many other people that have run this and MSDs and what have you that they can up and take a shit at any time and leave you stranded. And I don't like that idea. So it really kind of is appealing to me to go back to points. And I kind of am a bit of an anorak in that I like to have this, Stone Age stuff because it's just weirder and it's more interactive and it's just kind of cool. So I've been kind of looking around for a points distributor, and incredibly, they're hard to find. Most of what is out there is brand new Chinese-made units, typically sold under the Cardone brand name, which I have no love for. Cardone, when I was an auto parts guy back in the days, we used to sell a lot of their remanufactured things. And they were frankly garbage, and I don't suspect that their standards are much higher today. So I've been trying to find an alternative to that. I would like to find an original Motorcraft Ford distributor, but they're a little hard to come by. And when you do find them, a lot of these guys are selling them as, collector, date-coded, for your restoration on your Mustang kind of thing, and they want hundreds of dollars for them, which I'm not interested in that. So the jury's still out on that. I haven't yet decided what I'm going to do. I'm contemplating another brand of new distributor that I think is different than the Cardone thing, but who knows? It's still probably Chinese made, and those seem to be very hit or miss. However, most of the complaints on the Chinese ones seem to be on the electronic ones where, once again, they will just up and quit. So we're still kind of doing our homework on that. But that's what I'm considering doing here with this. The other big thing that we've had to struggle with on this swap is this throttle linkage. Now, I finally got this kind of where I want it to be. Again, we don't have enough travel here, so I'm still working on that with the pedal. I'm going to have to bend the pedal rod, which I found out I can actually do pretty well. It's not that hard. I tried it on the 6-cylinder one over here in the workbench, and it was pretty easy. So this is the linkage that I've come up with. It's a modified Mustang piece. Essentially, I've cut the end off down here and then added threads up forward here so that this pin will be adjustable and go up far enough to connect to the Falcon throttle linkage. However, first of all, you can see that it's got some tension on it where it doesn't really want to stay in that lever. Now I can put a cotter pin in there and it'll hold it, but it kind of bothers me that it's doing that. I don't like that. The other problem is this Scott Drake made in China piece of junk. I was able to thread it okay with a die, and the nuts, as you can see here, are all thread on fine, but this pin piece actually, even though it threaded on at the back, when it got to a certain part, of course where I need it to be, it wound up being loose. The threads don't do anything. It just slides over the threads. It is so poorly made that it no longer threads onto the shaft everywhere. I took the 6-cylinder one off and put it on this shaft, and it threads the whole way. So the part here is the problem. This is just a cheap piece of junk. Unfortunately, the 6-cylinder one's way shorter, and it won't go through this throttle rod bushing fully. It only goes, like maybe that much. So I put double nuts on it here, and as a way of holding it in the proper place, but I'm not happy with that. I don't like the idea of that. I'm not sure that it's going to stay, and then this thing might get loose and start to move, and then the throttle's all kind of cattywampus, and I don't like it. So now I'm looking at doing a threaded rod with these heim ends on it. And I have the two ends, I just don't have the rod yet because the only place I can find the rod that I need is Speedway Motors. And they want $12 shipping on a part that costs $12. So that's kind of irritating. I'm kind of waiting to see if I have a couple more things I can add to an order to make it worth my time. Something else I discovered is that the fan is actually farther away from the radiator than I would like. And that's because of the spacer. Now this is like I think it's about a 1 or maybe 1.5 inch spacer that's on here. This was on the V8 when I got it. But the 6-cylinder has a spacer that is much wider. Unfortunately, that spacer refuses to come off of the fan for the 6. And it should be longer than that one anyway. They do make a 2 and a 2.25, I believe, inch spacer that I can buy, that I'm probably just going to get the biggest one I can and move that fan closer to the radiator. And I have room. I mean, you can see clearly there's several inches of room here. So I want to move that up towards the radiator more, and I'd like to add a shroud, but the shrouds are really expensive for what they are. They're just plastic, and they're like $100. And I was kind of looking around seeing if there was an alternative to maybe what's in the catalogs, and using the part numbers from the original Ford parts, it's weird. These cars didn't have shrouds unless you got air conditioning, in which case it would have a shroud. The shroud for an AC equipped V8 Falcon is the same part number as one for an early Bronco. Of course, that one's not any cheaper than any of the other ones, so there's that. I think we're going to try it without the shroud at first and just see what it does. These cars apparently went through most of their lives with no fan shrouds on them when they were new, and I don't think it was that big of a deal. We've got a better radiator than what they would have had originally, and so on. So we'll try it and see what happens, with the understanding that we may have to add a shroud at a later time. Now, of course, the 6-cylinder exhaust obviously doesn't work with a V8, and I wouldn't want single exhaust anyway. So I've been trying to figure out how to most effectively complete the exhaust system. Typically, what somebody would probably do at this juncture is just take the car to a shop and have a system made to work with whatever they've got, typically headers. And you'll recall that we don't have headers because we don't have the room on this side because of the linkages and steering and so forth, so that I had to use these manifolds. Now, these are Hi-Po 289 Mustang manifolds. The Falcon and Fairlane were never sold with these exhaust manifolds, so there is no existing Y-pipe, H-pipe, whatever you want to call it, to attach to this. However, they do, of course, make one for the Mustang with these manifolds. And I'm contemplating this and thinking, well, what's different about this application from Mustang to this chassis? The engine and transmission lengths are the same. It would have to clear the same things regardless on either one of these cars in the same fashion. My instinct is that the Mustang H-pipe should fit the Fairlane Falcon chassis. Now, where it winds up underneath, I don't know. But as far as bolting up and clearing everything at the front, I think we'll be okay. So I've gone ahead and ordered one from CJ Pony Parts. I actually went up there to pick it up, and they didn't have any in stock, so they're actually shipping it to me. Said it would be a couple of weeks because they're on back order. But I'm going to try installing that and seeing if that fits under the car well enough that everything clears, because that would solve a good portion of the system construction, and I wouldn't have to have a shop do that. And I've had them do it to manifolds before, and sometimes the attachment isn't the greatest. It depends on the guy doing it. So I'd like to use something that's maybe more factory. Plus, I like the idea of having things that are, bolt on and removable. And sometimes these aftermarket systems, when they put them together, wind up being, all welded together, and then you can't service anything. That gets us as far as an H-pipe. Again, I think it'll work, but I'm not 100% sure. Then we talk about, can we get the rest of a system in a box shipped to our door, or do we still have to go to an exhaust shop? Once again, not really an application for this car, as when these cars did have V8s, they had single exhaust. And also, we're not, dealing with a header system, so we don't want anything aftermarket designed for headers. Flowmaster does make a system for the Fairlane, but it's 3-inch pipe and comes with an H pipe that's designed to work with stock manifolds or headers or whatever they make it. It doesn't work with what I have. And it's expensive. So I didn't want that. I didn't want the 3-inch. I'm going to probably be using 2 1/4 because it's going to be plenty for this car. And I did find one listing on Autocrafters for a system for a Fairlane without an H pipe. It's just the pipes after the H pipe, over the axle pipes, tail pipes, and 2 mufflers. It's actually only 6 pieces, 3 on each side. The mufflers, I don't care about those. Probably won't like what it comes with anyway. There's some kind of turbo muffler, and I'd probably replace them anyway. But it does come with tailpipes, and it does come with mid pipes. Now, further research, trying to figure out what the difference is between a Falcon and a Fairlane. And it is generally the wheelbase. The Fairlane is 5 inches longer wheel to wheel than the Falcon. So they added some space in the floor pan part of the chassis someplace. Although it seems that the floor pans themselves are the same. I don't know if it's just added in the section back here where the rear seat is that goes over the axle. It might be there where they've added the length. I don't know. Haven't been able to figure that out for a fact. Need to get these cars parked beside each other with a tape measure someday and figure it all out. The other thing, obviously, is I think the Fairlane has much larger overhang at the back. So the tailpipes on a Fairlane are probably going to be longer than is necessary. Well, longer is better than shorter, so we can always trim them back. So that is an option. So if the H-pipe that I'm waiting for fits well, I'm going to try ordering that exhaust system and seeing if that will work. And if it does, at least somewhat, I may have to shorten it, but then I'll have a bolted on exhaust system. Won't have to take it to an exhaust shop, won't have to worry about, driving it there with no exhaust on it or having a rollback take it at, a couple $100 expense. And I like the idea of being able to do it here in the home shop versus farming it out. There's an exhaust shop in my town, but it's a guy who works 2 days a week because he's mostly retired, and trying to find him is one thing and another. And the closest shop is probably a good 35, 40 minutes away, and on the highway. Probably would rather have somebody haul the car there, honestly, than drive it all that distance with no mufflers on it. So that's where we are with the exhaust. Might be some light at the end of the tunnel for that. It's going to take some work to make it fit, of course. If it doesn't end up working, it's still not going to be a slap it on and go. But I like where the pipes appear to exit and so forth. So we'll see if that works. That's where we are. I have another cool thing that I got for the interior, but I'm not going to show it to you yet. I think I'm going to wait till it's on. And we are not that far away from trying to fire this thing up. I want to try to get this throttle linkage figured out once and for all. I want to finalize my decision on the distributor and complete the running of the fuel lines. And then I think we're ready to go. So hopefully in the next video, we'll have engine sounds for you. I'm sorry for the delay. Those of you who've been following along since the beginning, it wasn't my choice. I would much rather have been out here working on it, but it just was not to be. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you real soon.